Hi, everyone. For those joining us right away, we're going to start shortly. Give us just about a minute and we'll get started as people trickle in. Give it about a few more seconds here. Okay, well, let's get started. Thank you for zooming in today with us. On behalf of the Sandbox Centre team, welcome to our Experts in Residence session, The Legal Brief with Barriston Law. Today, our panelists include Josh Valler of Barriston Law, and joining him are special guests Geneviève Lagacé-Gore of McBride Robillard Financial Solutions and Janice Leroux of HR Performance and Results. Today, we're going to dive into employment law and health benefits as it relates to COVID-19. So any questions you may have, don't be shy. Our experts are here to help. For those who haven't been acquainted with me or the Sandbox, I'm Mackenzie. I'm one of the 4 members of the Sandbox team. We're located downtown Barrie, but primarily on your screens now, and connect people and their ideas to business resources on their journey to success. If there are any new Zoomies joining us here today, here are a couple quick tips. Attendees are muted as they come in the room, so we can't hear you. We'll be taking questions throughout, so we really encourage you to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen for any questions, and we'll facilitate as they come in. If you need to take a look back on what was mentioned here today, don't worry, the resources will be provided after the webinar. And just wanted to thank all of our community partners for supporting with the sharing of our events. We couldn't do it without you. And of course, a big thank you to our sponsor, Barriston Law, for delivering today's session. So without further ado, Josh, I'll give you the floor to start us off.
Yeah, and thank you, Mackenzie, and thank you, Sandbox, for putting this on. And I want to thank our guests, Geneviève from McBride Robillard and Janice Leroux. Geneviève is new to the Zoom webinar with Sandbox. She's going to be presenting for us on COVID-19 employee benefit and resources as we start to go back to work. And it's also going to be really crucial for people who haven't been allowed to go back to work to kind of pay attention to this and figure out what your obligations are as employers and as employees with respect to benefits. So without further ado, maybe Geneviève, you can just say a couple words about yourself and what your role is and what brings you here today.
See, I am a newbie. I wasn't unmuted there. Thank you, Josh, and I'm very excited to be here today to present some really important information about employee benefits and how it relates to COVID-19, and hopefully give you some good resources and what's available to you. So I'm Geneviève Lagacé-Gore. I'm the Manager of Employee Benefit Solutions at McBride Robillard Financial Solutions here in Barrie. Been leading the division since 2016, very excited. And that's it. We might as well just jump in.
Okay, perfect. And joining us on the call is myself. I'm an associate lawyer at Barriston Law, practicing the area of employment law and general civil litigation, and Janice Leroux, who is with HR Performance and Results. And thank you for joining us again, Janice.
You're welcome.
All right, so why don't we get started?
All right. So with this pandemic, I mean, all of us know how fast things have been changing. And in the world of employee benefits, it's the same thing. Initially, employers were trying to focus on ensuring that their employees that were diagnosed with the virus had adequate short-term disability coverage, or if they were traveling while this pandemic was growing, that they were still covered for their travel insurance. But what's happened since then, and in the last 6 weeks or so, as businesses were forced to close their doors, the attention's really shifted to implications to maintaining benefits for employees. So insurance companies really had to step up and come up with very specific provisions and accommodations for their clients that were going to speak to COVID-19. And so what we're faced as benefits consultants is to kind of help our clients figure out, okay, here are my questions. What are the insurance companies offering as it comes to their program? Josh, if you want to go back one slide.
Okay, there you go.
There you go. Thank you. So let's dive into some of those questions. So the first one was, what happens if my benefits were renewing? So many of my clients had their annual renewals May 1st, June 1st. And so right away, we needed to make sure that we provided not only the normal negotiations on your behalf, but also that the insurance companies understood that putting an increase at this time was not appropriate. So across the board, the industry offered a 2-month extension. So someone who was typically renewing on May 1st was pushed to July 1st, and anyone who had a renewal for June could delay until August. Now, obviously, if you had excellent performance and required a reduction based on your previous year claims, then those reductions were applied right away. Our role of negotiating those reductions still continued and get applied. There's no deferrals on that. Then what we're dealing with right away was, the layoff provisions. What happens if I lay off my employees, and what do I do to extend those benefits? Many of you already know that there are standard provisions when we put employees on layoff or if there's a strike. What the insurance companies needed to do is be very specific to COVID-19 because it was something that we had never seen before. And so many of the insurers extended benefits, obviously to the 3-month mark, but some have gone beyond for health and dental. So I've extended to 5 or 6 months for those benefits. But what they've also done is remove the recall date. So what would be the return to work date on that employee's temporary layoff? So that requirement was removed. So they could just simply advise the insurance company that they had employees on layoff from a certain date, and those benefits would be extended. For disability benefits, where we typically see extensions of 31 days, many of the insurance companies provided extensions to that as well to June 1st. And then we'll see in the next few weeks what will happen to those benefits once we hit the June 1st mark. Here on the third question that I've put up here, what happens if I've reduced the work hours for my employees? Well, again, insurers needed to accommodate that. So some have provided reduced minimums. So for example, if their standards was that an employee needed to work 20 hours a week to be eligible for their benefit program, many reduced that by 50%. So let's say 10 hours per week. And many have communicated that that they're not enforcing this contract requirement, that employees will continue to be eligible, regardless of how many hours they work per week. Next slide.
There you go.
And of course, with the uncertainty of the pandemic, it happens. I've had many conversations that there may be some payment in arrears and not being able to pay for the benefit program, but wanting to stay in place and not be put in suspension. So many of the insurance providers enhanced their grace periods from 30 days to 60 days without any claims suspension. It's also a good thing to request is to remove the pre-existing, sorry, not the pre-existing, the pre-authorized payment setup that you may have with your insurance company. So this way, you're in control of when you're submitting your payment ins for payment to stay ahead, right? To stay on top of your premiums so that you don't go into too much of it. But at least it's your call on timing. But most importantly, and I think this is the most important part, is providing employers with more financial support. And that came just recently in the last 2 weeks. They've communicated premium credits. So what that means is that insurers really needed to come to the plate, right? So we needed to say to them, hey, non-essential businesses are closed. There is a substantial reduction in claims being submitted. So that is dental care, vision care, paramedical services. So your chiropractor, your massage therapist, all those claims are not being submitted right now. So what are you going to do to help employers? And that's where they came back and said, we'll apply some premium credits. So with that though, it varies by insurance companies. What we found is all of them would have reviewed their aggregate data to determine the level of deductions they were prepared to offer. You'll find that some insurers came out and announced that they would only provide premium credits on dental care. So typically we're seeing 50% dental premium reductions. Some have gone as high as 75% reduction. But some, that's all they're doing. But I will say the majority have announced that they are also providing premium reduction on non-drug related health premium. And that comes into about 10 to 20% rate reductions for that benefit. And you should have received by now, over the last week or so, a communication from your insurer to let you know what your specific premium credits will be. If you haven't received that, don't hesitate to reach out to your broker. Make sure you have that conversation so that is not missed. You can reach out to me, of course, as I have a full list, so don't hesitate to reach out. So what does this mean and what month? So it's all retroactive to April. So April's billing statement. You will either see it on May, your statement for May, but some insurers weren't able to make that change so quickly. So you won't actually see your April credit until your June statement. Okay, so keep an eye out as to which statement you'll get your credit. Now, the other thing that varies from insurance companies is how many months are they actually going to give you credits for? The majority are actually advising that they've approved an April credit, but are reviewing it month to month. And so some are have not yet confirmed to us that they are continuing for May. Now, some have already come right out of the gate and said April, May, June, they will issue some credits. So keep an eye out on that and don't hesitate to request some more information on that.
Okay, and thank you, Geneviève, for that so far. And Janice, I don't know if you've come across this with any of your employer clients and how you're working with them to implement benefits or on recalls or through this, taking these steps.
Sorry, I missed that, Josh. Did you, do I have anything
to add to this, or what's been your experience so far with your clients, with your employer clients? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, like I think certainly I've actually seen and heard from a few clients, they've been very happy with the insurers coming back and actually offering a decline in their premiums because a big part of the labor cost that an employer pays in terms of, from a total comp perspective, is group insurance benefits.
Yeah.
And so they're certainly happy with that. For the most part, I have seen employers absolutely agreeing to extend benefits during a temporary layoff. They know that it's already creating a financial hardship by laying the employees off, so they are agreeing in terms of continuing their benefits.
Yeah, and I think it's really vital too for employers and for insurers to work together in that respect as well. I mean, obviously no one's going to go see a dentist at this point in time because they're closed. Same with massage therapy or physiotherapy. So I think, you know, it's really important that you kind of detail or cater to the employers with the insurance companies to figure out, okay, how do we maintain the employees' benefits throughout, while at the same time making sure everyone's being treated fairly. So that's useful. Thank you.
Yeah, and our goal is to keep that pressure, right? To keep giving that push to make sure insurers continue to provide that credit for as long as the pandemic continues and those businesses are still closed. Okay. So what I also wanted to take an opportunity before we open up to questions is also provide clients with employers with, you know, what are the resources? You know, this pandemic has created quite a lot of stress. And so what do we have embedded in our programs already? What are additional digital services that the insurance industry is adding to group benefits? What preferred pricing is out there, and other sort of free government programs that employers can communicate to their employees and really push that out to them. So I've put some information here together. Let's go through each one and give you more details on each. So let's start with employee assistance programs, such a crucial tool during this crisis. And many employers may not realize or didn't have really the time to research this, but many insurance companies have these programs embedded in their program, in their policy. It's usually attached to a long-term disability program. So if you offer long-term disabilities, there's a good chance that there is a employee assistance program attached to it. So inquire about that. If you have a standalone employee assistance program, really dive into the information that they're providing specifically to COVID-19. But as an overview, the employee assistance program is typically used to provide the employees and their family members access to a consultant, short-term counseling with a therapist, should that be a social worker or a psychologist, provide some health and wellness support, as well as issue-specific resources. And what I've found over the last month or two is that they've really provided lots of good newsletter type information that you could send to your employees that speak to the things that they're facing today that they didn't really face before. So working from home and how to manage that anxiety or the stress of that, or having to manage work if they're working from home, and also having to do the homeschooling, right? We're all being challenged with having our children and trying to help them through the change to virtual learning. So those are bringing up stress, anxiety. It has shown also already in some of their surveys I'm reading that it's doubled the level of depression being reported. So it's really important to, we recommend to regularly communicate to your employees that they have these resources and to get the help that they need, should that be a webinar or actually have a virtual conversation with a counselor to talk about their stress or their anxiety. And that leads to virtual care, which is another way for us to connect with healthcare professionals. from home. And so I call it a virtual walk-in clinic. And I've been talking about this new platform for a few years. I think Janice can attest to that. And what the pandemic has created is now that the insurance industry is coming up to the table, and they're saying, we're going to release, provide access to this program. Sometimes it's free, and sometimes it's at a preferred pricing rate. So that gives employees access to chat with a doctor or a nurse, not just about mental health issues, but also physical ailments, and having some prescriptions, referrals, and provided through virtual means. I do want to also say, so these are platforms that you can add through your benefits program, but there is a free program offered for all Ontarians, and that's called TIAhealth.com. And it's free of charge for anyone with a valid health card. And they provide the same services, online appointments with Canadian doctors for prescriptions, referrals, and other needs. And what we will find with TIA Health is that you may have actually some longer wait times because it is a free program. So keep that in mind, but also look at what your insurance provider is doing to give you access to virtual care platforms. Next slide. So we talked a little bit about how we know that paramedical practitioners, most of them are closed, obviously, through this pandemic. But what we're also seeing, though, is that for those that are able to move their business to virtual appointments, the benefit plan will reimburse for those appointments. So keep in mind, it's not for every practitioner. You'll find, dietitian, naturopath, occupational therapists, of course, psychologists and social workers are covered, as well as speech therapists. So keep that in mind, that there's still an opportunity for employees to visit those practitioners through virtual means. And what's important to know, though, that all your plan provisions, so if you have $500 per calendar year per practitioner, that's still being adjudicated, as well as per visit limits are still being applied. So the pricing still needs to be in line. Another consideration in this that's been highlighted in this pandemic is mail order pharmacies. It's such a great resource that I don't believe it's being utilized quite enough, and hopefully this will change over this next year. But it really allows employers to partner with a preferred provider to give you lower drug costs, lower markups, lower dispensing fees for your employees. It allows them to get their prescription filled online with the convenience of being at home and being shipped to their home address. There's no time limits, so 24 hours a day is available. And you can have even the convenience of having a one-on-one conversation with the pharmacist about your needs. Let's not kid ourselves. Amazon is going to get into the pharmacy business. It's going to happen. It's happening in the US. So the same premise occurs here. So let's encourage our employees to source out their medication more efficiently. So Costco has a mail order pharmacy, just to highlight pocketpills.com, as well as Alliance Pharmacy. And you can reach out to your broker to talk about how we would implement this into your benefit program. And lastly, I wanted to include some important free programs that are being invested, of course, from our governments, should that be the Ontario or Canadian governments. And this is ongoing. There's more announcements coming that even Ontario is giving more funding to some cognitive behavior therapy and accessing that through Mind Beacon. So it's ongoing, and we're going to see more of that investment. So these two here, Bounce Back Ontario is a self-guided program for anyone above the age of 15 that are experiencing some anxiety, depression, and are really looking for coaching and looking to go through a program to adapt and learn some coping skills to improve on these experiences. You do need to be referred by a primary care provider. They are making some they're adaptable right now in these circumstances, as long as you're connected with your primary care provider. It's really a life skills program. And so that's a great resource. And Wellness Together Canada is a one-stop shop, is what I like to say. It's a portal of great information that allows you at no cost allows you to really customize what you're looking for, and they'll give you the access. You can sign up or simply just log in and get the resource you need. You can do a self-assessment. You can track your progress, do some guided courses, and also get some access to counseling through text or phone. So again, these are really great free resources that's available to all of us. And it's just a great information to give to your employees to know that they have this available to them.
Janice, do you have anything to add to that? Have you encountered that with your practice there?
Yeah, like I think certainly those organizations that have employee and family assistance programs, what I would recommend is that if that's part of your benefit package today, then use this as an opportunity to kind of relaunch the program, educate, communicate with your workforce, all the benefits of utilizing it, because we are seeing an increase in stress and anxiety in the workplace. There's an increase actually in domestic violence disputes as well. So I think if you've got that part of your benefit package, fantastic. Just make sure that you communicate it. You can also post, if you flip it to the next slide, the Bounce Back, there's lots of mental health resources. Bounce Back Ontario is a great resource that Geneviève just elaborated on.
Mm-hmm.
I would highly recommend that you even send out a bulletin to your employees with some of those mental health resources. It's not something that people like to talk about in the workplace, but if you can at least send it out and make it available to them, then they know that they've got some resources to reach out to.
Yeah, and I just want to get from an employment law perspective too, and on that note, I know we're getting a little away from the resources that are available, but it does tie into it, is an employer's duty to accommodate. And I think coming from COVID-19 and the post-COVID-19, we're going to see kind of legal landscape change in some respects with mental health, especially when it comes to an employee who's had difficulties dealing with the repercussions of COVID-19, the stress that's added. It's been stressful for everyone. But you never know, everyone's different, right? So just if you have an employee that comes to you and they've expressed a concern about, their mental health and they're missing time or they're suffering from some form of mental illness, you do as an employer have a duty to accommodate them and to come up with different aspects of their employment or how you can work with them to secure their health and work with them to get them back into work. So. All right, so if we can stop this, there we go.
Josh, just before we begin the questions, I just wanted to jump in. There's a question in the chat. And I'll just ask because it has to do with an employment law. So somebody's asking, going into the post-COVID world, how will the employer framework differ from going in from the perspective of the law? So what might we want to be looking at when setting up employee support going in terms of what will change?
I see the question here.
Okay,
yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, and great question. And I'm going to give a typical lawyer response saying that it depends. So one way that I can see, I mean, the landscape is constantly evolving. It's very fluid. No one knows what's going to happen, but I mean, there are frameworks that are starting to come in place. We're going to touch more upon that in a later webinar. So I'd encourage you to stay tuned for more details on that, where we go through the frameworks being announced by the Ford government. But what I can tell you is that there are going to be questions about what's a safe work environment. So an employer's obligations under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So making sure that you take the proper precautions for social distancing, that you take the proper precautions for cleaning the workspace. You know, whether you're in a manufacturing facility, an office space, there's different best practices moving forward that you can look up. There's guidelines that are being announced by the government and have been announced by the government with respect to how businesses can open. So I think in terms of what a business looks like going forward and what normal operations look like going forward, that's going to change for sure. You're going to have to take additional steps to make a safe and healthy work environment. I don't know if Janice has anything she wants to add.
Yeah, like we've seen, they've already released all of the guidance documents. So as Josh said, you're going to have an upcoming webinar on that. So so they've got a lot of guidelines in place. You know, it's the Ministry of Labor that is regulating compliance. I think they announced last week they hired 58 new inspectors. So they've got 500, and they're going to be out there ensuring that workplaces are in compliance. And I actually see that as a long-term, this is going to be for the long term, right? That organizations need to be very diligent about ensuring they've got ensuring that they've got the right practices in place and protecting their employees as it relates to the hazard of COVID-19 and any other biohazards.
Perfect. The next question I see here is, if I want to maintain my employees layoff past the 13 weeks, do I have to continue paying their benefits? Janice, I can touch upon this a little bit, and then if you want to also touch on it as well. Technically speaking, if you continue a layoff past 13 weeks, that's considered a layoff. But under there's a different provision of the Employment Standards Act that allows you to maintain it for up to 35 weeks. Under very certain or specific circumstances where, you know, the employee is receiving a substantial part of their income, or if you maintain the benefits as well. But even within that element, there's different nuances, and I'll let Janice talk about the nuances with respect to, you know, long-term disability benefits, short-term disability benefits, and Geneviève would be able to chime in here as well. So maybe we'll start with Janice and then go to Geneviève.
Sure, I'll defer to Geneviève as it relates to the specific benefits, but so just in addition to what you said, Josh, if the employer has applied for a sub-program and they have that registered to top up the individual's unemployment benefits, then they can actually continue the layoff up to 35 weeks as well. So it can be group insurance benefits, any other substantial payments, or supplementary unemployment benefits too as well. So that's another one that's under that particular legislation. And then I'll just defer to Geneviève so she can speak to what happens with LTD or short-term disability.
Yeah, so as I mentioned a little bit earlier, there's been some extensions specifically for COVID-19 and long-term disability, being that right now they're putting the June 1st limit for extending that benefit. I expect that there will be some further changes to that, but they haven't really highlighted yet any further extensions than the 3 months, or even in some cases the 35 weeks, or going past June 1st for long-term disability. So until I actually see some communication on that, I'm not sure what they're going to be doing after that.
Yeah. So the next question we have is, what if employers are unable to maintain their plans? Can they choose to terminate their plan in the short term? You know, the answer to that, once again, is it depends. It really depends on what the terms of the employment agreement are. But typically, though, benefits compose a major component of your employment agreement in consideration for your employment agreement with your employee. And unilateral change to the employment contract, such as the cancellation of benefits, could constitute constructive dismissal if that employee doesn't agree to it, or if there's not some other form of consideration, and they could look for severance or some termination pay out of that. I don't know if Janice, if you've encountered that at all in, with your clients who've had to cancel.
Yeah, not like outside of COVID-19, yes, quite a few actually, where it's just become too cost prohibitive. And so they've canceled it as a result of that. Yeah, like I think it's, well, definitely to your point, it could be potentially a constructive dismissal. I think it's important in the employment agreement, though, in your clause, your benefit clause within the employment agreement, to always put statements that the employer has the right to amend or alter or modify the group insurance benefits at any time too as well. So that's what I would certainly add to that.
Okay, thank you, Janice. If I terminate my employee, what are my obligations as it relates to benefits? I'll jump in here quickly, and then Janice, if you want to also chime in as well, and Geneviève, I don't know if you have anything to add, but from the perspective of what the case law is and what the law is, including the Employment Standards Act, if you terminate an employee, you have an obligation to maintain both their pay and their benefit package for a period, for the notice period that's prescribed by law under the ESA. So just say you have an employment agreement with an employee, their employment agreement stipulates that they're only entitled to the ESA minimums, which is typically 1 week for every year of service. They've been there for 2 years. You would be required to pay them 2 weeks of notice, and that would include 2 weeks under their benefit package as well. And anything else that's included in their employment agreement. So there is an obligation to continue paying the benefits for that notice period, but I'll let Janice also comment on that as well.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Also, there's an obligation to pay and calculate vacation pay on that notice period. So as Josh mentioned, it's 1 week per year of service all the way up to a maximum of 8 weeks. If your payroll's over 2.5 million and the employee's been employed longer than 5 years, you also have severance pay obligations under the Ontario Employment Standards Act, but you're not required to continue benefits during that severance period. It's only during the notice of termination. Usually, and Josh can speak to this too as well, if Josh is helping you with a wrongful dismissal situation or case matter, then typically, you know, the opposing counsel would come back and say, look, we want you to extend the employee's benefits during the larger severance period of time. And so often we see, from a negotiation perspective, an agreement being made to continue the benefits if it's like a 12-month notice period, 6-month notice period too as well.
Yeah, and further to what Janice was saying, it really depends, and Geneviève, perhaps you can chime in as well, but it really depends on the insurer and whether the benefit provider is willing to extend it beyond the ESA minimum or the notice period minimums. So typically when we're structuring that and the employer or the employee is agreeable to a certain amount of time past the minimum notice period requirements to continue paying for the benefits, if you're negotiating for the employer, say, listen, we're willing to continue it for 10 weeks, but we can't promise that because it's not our promise to make. It's up to the insurance company to approve it. But if they do, we'll continue payment of the benefits for that period of time. So Geneviève, have you ever encountered that?
Absolutely. That's such an important piece because many times I've been notified of a severance offering after the fact. And it becomes a little bit of a challenge for myself to go to the insurance company and making sure that you actually get what you've agreed to. So if you are, you know, trying to extend, let's say you're trying to extend 6 months, 12 months, I've seen on employee benefits, having us as part of the negotiations is a very important part of it, so that the insurance company provides you the approval before you present your severance option.
Yeah, and then thank you, Geneviève, and that's important. So if you're looking at doing that, just make sure you communicate with your broker or with your insurer, just to make sure that's even feasible, because you don't want to make a promise you can't keep, right, at the end of the day, because otherwise you're going to run into some troubles there. So what happens if my employees are paying a portion of the premiums for their benefits? Can I require them to pay their portion during the temporary layoff? Janice and then Geneviève.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Like you have, I would say, three options. The first option is, and you should actually have a discussion with your employee prior to issuing the temporary layoff. First option is you can get them to agree or ask them to agree to make arrangements to pay their portion of premiums throughout the temporary layoff. Second option is you pay the premiums and you allow that, you do that and continue that during the temporary layoff. And then the third option is you make arrangements upon when they return to certainly get their portion of that. The only exception, which I'll let Geneviève maybe speak to, it just as it relates to long-term disability premiums because of the tax implications.
Yeah, absolutely. For long-term disability, what we want to make sure that it doesn't change the taxability. And so I have had employers say, okay, I'm going to do sort of a loan to cover off during the period, but as long as the employee then, pays back plus, keeps up on current premiums, I think that's the most important thing. And making sure that it stays a non-taxable benefit. So very similar options. It's just making sure that there's a very clear path that the employee continues to paying 100% of it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Geneviève. So the next question is, have most group insurance providers eliminated the waiting period for short-term disability for COVID-19 related claims? And Geneviève?
So they've, I think they're using more of a case-by-case. None of the communications we've received from the insurer has been, provided clearly in their information. So I think as clients reach out and say, okay, we have this member affected by COVID-19, will you waive the waiting period? In most instances, they're waiving the waiting period. And I believe, Janice, that's what you've experienced as well with your clients.
Yes, yeah, but very specific wording in those particular policy changes that it really literally has to be related to COVID-19, and it does not apply to any other disability type of claims for short term.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, and thank you both. If I decide to continue, this is the next question. If I decide to continue benefits during a temporary layoff, do I have to continue all benefits? Janice, did you want to touch on that?
Actually, Geneviève can speak to as it relates to like short-term and LTD. Do you want to speak to that? Yeah.
Yeah, so many of the insurance companies have given the clients options so that, they decide if they want to extend disability benefits or not. So they have actually left it to the employer to make that decision. So, option A, option B, all or decided to not continue disability. What I've also seen is insurers saying if you want to actually suspend dental care or make some slight amendments to the benefit plan, those things are also options. Now, should you do it? That's, of course, a question for Janice and Josh as to should you make those changes? Know that you have, avenues to do that. It's just, is it the right decision for your organization? That's always the important point.
Yeah, for the most part, like we recommend, like take a look at, take a look at the cost of your premiums and whether or not it's the affordability factor, right? So again, your employees are experiencing financial hardship by a temporary layoff. So if you are able to afford to continue the premiums, it just makes good sense from an employee relations perspective and also from a retention perspective too as well. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
And I think the important thing too, and we've been focused on giving practical and pragmatic advice to employers. I mean, like Janice said, and I'm going to echo that too, you have to look at the cost and whether or not you can afford it, right? because ultimately, while it's nice to provide the benefits during the temporary layoff and it's positive for everyone, you want to have a place for them to come back and work, right? So if it's going to essentially break the back or be the straw that breaks the back, then absolutely not, right? But if you can afford it and you can work out a package with the insurer, absolutely. I mean, we all have to work together during this time. It's nice to see that perhaps the light's at the end of the tunnel, and we're going to get people back to work, or we're going to start opening up again, and we're starting to see that right now. But during this time, if you want to continue the benefits, just make sure that you're having conversations with your employees and with your insurer to make sure that you don't run afoul of any contractual obligations that you have, and you don't run afoul with the insurer, overextend with the insurer. So.
Sorry, Josh, I was just going to add too as well, is that like when you issue a temporary layoff, if we have some of the participants today, the recommendation, if it is still get to issue a letter, and in the letter of a temporary layoff, you should actually clearly state whether you're going to continue benefits or not. And then it's an employee acknowledgement on the sign off too, as well. As if it's absent from the employment agreement, it's advisable to certainly put in the continuation of benefits in that temporary layoff letter. Yeah,
no, absolutely, right. And you know, right now you want to document everything because these issues haven't been tested by the courts. They haven't been tested by the labor board. We're kind of in uncharted territories right now. The court, while it's open, isn't hearing any in-person hearings. No, this will take years to work its way through courts if there is any sort of complaint or allegation of wrongdoing by an employee or by an employer with respect to the benefits portion. So make sure you document everything and make sure that you communicate, because the more communication you have with your employees, the less likely that there's going to be issues or legal issues arising later on. Because if everyone's aware and everyone signs off on it, like Janice said, they acknowledge what they're doing and they acknowledge that they're agreeable to it, the less likely that you're going to face litigation, 2 or 3 years down the road. So we have another question, and I think we have about 10 minutes or so left. What do you, and this one is likely for Geneviève, what do you anticipate what will happen to the claims utilization once the pandemic ends?
So there's definitely going to be some, we're already having this conversation about what will trends look like, what will happen once the practitioners are able to reopen dental offices, things like that. So, we're putting together a few predictions. We anticipate that when the paramedical practitioners are able to open up again, there'll most likely be a catch-up, right? They may even extend hours to accommodate their clients. We anticipate those to go up. We don't expect drug benefits to change very much, so that trend should be stay as is, unless new prescriptions all of a sudden go on the rise. But that's open right now. We anticipate, of course, a spike in dental claims, as those practitioners will want to recover and make sure that each their clients come in for a cleaning, and so we expect that. What we need to prepare ourselves for a little bit is disability pricing. We start looking at what happened during the 2008 financial crisis and how that affected disability claims. They anticipated the worst, but most people, there was some higher usage, but most people wanted to, keep their jobs and wanted to stay at their jobs. So it's a possibility this, once we get back to work, people will want to continue being at work. But there is, already some talks for the insurance companies to say, with low interest rates, they'll, potentially increase premium to cover off their financial commitments. Claim duration will probably rise over this period in 2020 because some of us who are waiting for surgeries have been put on hold until this pandemic stops or ends or lessens. So someone who was should be only off 6 months, maybe off a year because they're not getting the surgery they need today. So if claims durations go up, that again increases the cost. And it's really tricky. And Janice, maybe you can speak to this, how do you bring back someone on a return to work program in this environment can be a little tricky. So all of those things will affect potentially some pricing when it comes to disability programs. So to keep that in mind, and we're keeping a close eye on that.
Yeah.
Now, Geneviève, just as a follow-up, do you anticipate that some employers may look to more detailed plans, like or flex plans? Like I know I've been talking to a couple employers that are like, okay, listen, we want to focus on mental health, or we want to let our employees decide. Are you looking at that as well?
Absolutely. Hybrid plans, adding flexibility to plans has been, the interest has been on a rise now for, 2 to 3 years now, having way more conversations with clients about that. And also this pandemic creates a conversation about, should we pivot some of those crucial premium dollars towards more concrete mental health initiatives and virtual care platforms embedded into the programs going forward. So yes, absolutely, redesigning or having those really in-depth conversations about flexibility is top of mind, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I see there's another question in the chat that was, how does this all apply to contract work? Is there any distinction to be made? I'm gonna jump in on this, and then Janice, perhaps you can also supplement. But it goes to the terms of the contract. If you're a contractor, there's a whole bunch of different considerations that you have to look at that could result in you actually being found to be an employee. I'm not going to get into all those specifics here and now, but there are a ton of cases that deal with this. But if you're just solely a contractor and you're dealing with, with one person or with multiple different people on contracts, you have to look at the terms of your agreement with that person. If there's termination provisions in that contract, fantastic. Those are the termination provisions that will apply. If there's benefit provisions in there, then those are the terms that will apply. Now, it gets a little bit trickier when just say you have one contract after another contract after another contract that can continue to roll in and roll in and roll in. There is case law to support the fact that you may be actually an employee or a dependent contractor, and your entitlements would then alter drastically. So it's really fact dependent. It changes based on your unique circumstances and the unique facts of your case. But that's something that you would likely need to talk to a lawyer about or look at yourself in terms of just figure out whether you'd fall within that distinction. Janice?
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that too, Josh, is that and Geneviève can jump in here too as well, but in your benefit master policy, they're typically, in order to be eligible for benefits, they define who's eligible, and they typically define a minimum hours threshold too as well. So, individuals, if they fit into the definition, they also have to be working a certain number of hours per week in order to be eligible for benefits too as well. So Geneviève, did you want to add anything as it relates to contractors?
Yeah, for sure. For contract employees, many times we actually set them in a separate class from full-time employees or even part-time employees. And the reason you do that is a lot of times contract employees, if you do have disability benefits, we typically don't extend disability benefits to contract employees. And you have to kind of make sure that your insurer provides approval and plan, when you do your plan design, because they may have some specific requirements, like the contract needs to be a minimum of 12 months or more, things like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's important just to draw the distinction between what Josh was referring to. I think, Josh, independent contractors, opposed to what Geneviève is referring to as an employee who's on your payroll, who actually is on a contract term.
Yeah.
So just not to make sure that there's a clear distinction between the two is important, right? Too as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. So I think we're just about that time. We're going to bring back Sandbox and Mackenzie. I do want to thank you, Geneviève, for coming to talk to us today about this topic. I know it's a topic that's on a lot of people's minds. It's at the forefront because we're, like I said, and I've repeated numerous times through these webinars, we're in weird times right now. So it's important that we get the information out to different people. So I do appreciate you coming on here to talk about the benefit plans and the support and resources available to employers.
Thank you so
and
much.
as always, thank you, Janice, for coming on. Your insight's always very, very valuable. And thank you to Sandbox for hosting this. I know it's a resource that's being utilized by a lot of businesses and individuals in the community. And I know they all really appreciate the work that you guys are doing and the webinars you're putting on. So thank you.
Thanks, Josh. And just completely going to echo exactly what you said. Wanted to thank all three of you for taking the time and giving us some top-notch expert advice today. I know all this uncertainty and all of this information that's being thrown at us. It's so nice to have this knowledge provided and so accessible right at our fingertips. So we really appreciate it. And we really appreciate everybody who joined us today, and wanted to let you know that this Tuesday, Josh had mentioned it earlier, but this coming Tuesday, May 12th at 4 p.m., our experts will be back. Josh, Janice, and a special guest, MPP of Barrie-Innisfil, Andrea Kanjan, will be joining us to discuss the newly announced Ontario Back to Work guidelines and what it means for your business. I know everyone is going to be looking for clarity with those guidelines, and so share this with your networks. If you think that they can benefit from this upcoming session, you can head to our website, sandboxcentre.com, to register and join a conversation on social at Sandbox Centre. So again, thanks for joining us today. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll see you next time. Bye.